a number of reasons. Schools being one, city being another, and all of the different ingredients that go into making up these budgets, which is good news. It impacts some of our vision challenges that we have related to affordability, but there are only certain things that we can solve for when it comes to supply. We want to move here so the value of our homes increase. One of the things that we need to be focused on as it relates to budget concerns, in my opinion, because having put budgets together in the private sector, there's always a lag in terms of performance and the investments that you make years before. Because of underspending that we've had in the past, because we haven't been able to fill vacancies, which are challenges in the market, and in some cases just simply having to keep up with demand, those chickens eventually come home to roost, and they impact our ability to remain competitive, to drive the type of performance that we see in our tax revenues, which again are driven from the investments that we make in the city and the schools themselves. And so I urge folks on both sides to take a look at some of the numbers that we have in our audit, as well as some of the challenges that we have to continue to make the investments, which will hopefully lead to the type of performance that all of us sit here licking our chops over related to budget surplus and a number of other things. And that's important, again, to make sure that we continue to invest in the right areas to stay ahead of this so we don't see numbers trending the other way. And I see some troubling things just over the last couple of years, and not blaming anyone, but in terms of investments in staff and resources, which are to some extent a product of the market that we're in right now. But we have to focus on making those investments so we can continue to drive the type of performance and the type of supply-demand fundamentals that we need in order to support these types of budget conversations. So again, I think it's great that we continue to outperform the market, and I think it's a function of good government and good schools here and making investments in the right areas, which allow us to command those higher values. So I just wanted to make that point at the beginning of this budget conversation. It's kudos to everyone for making those investments. We have to continue to do that. Don't take your foot off the gas, and we don't get too comfortable, so to speak.
Vice Mayor Kopp.
Just to flip back to the revenue surplus briefly, and your question, Mr. Castillo, reminded me of this. Typically, we would have solved all of our surplus stuff in September when we looked at things. So it's odd that it's still hanging out there in December waiting for an answer. And the reason for that is because we're still waiting for the library renovation numbers and the City Hall public safety numbers. So because we aren't going to get those numbers until January, we made a decision that we would not parse everything out in September this year. So that is why it is still hanging out there as a question. Everyone will hew to the spirit of the revenue sharing agreement, because I think it served us so well last year. And City Council will be discussing that in December and January.
Well, I appreciate this. I think one of the things that, at least I'm not going to speak for the school board, but one of the issues that I think we're wondering about is, I think it was our understanding that we had a deal, and so we're now wrestling with the fact that, well, September came and went, and now January will come, and it's not clear that this is still on the table, and that's a little unsettling. I think the other thing that we should think about from a budgetary standpoint, to Mr. Lichtenhaus's point, is one of the big areas on the school budget that has fallen short consistently year after year is professional development and training. That's one of the first things. That's actually one of the last things that we cut, and we always cut it. So we have a teacher shortage in Virginia, chronic, and professional development is a huge aspect that we can attract and retain and develop our professionals. So as we look forward to the next budget cycle, I certainly hope that human capital aspect of the school board's budget will get the attention that it honestly hasn't for the past 45 years.
Okay. I mean, I would suggest that the information that's been requested is very relevant to these ongoing discussions, and I think people do want to hew to the spirit of cooperation and the discussions and agreements, whatever you might want to characterize them, in this past cycle. And so I wouldn't take away from tonight's discussion so far that there's a desire to undo any good work that's been done last year, but just to try to better appreciate and understand where the different numbers lie and where they may be committed to or what they actually represent, so we all can understand kind of what's going on.
Could I,
Of course.
offer just one thought? thanks to everybody for continuing to press on what the numbers really are and need to be. It reminds me of when Tarter and I came on first 7 years ago and really tried to dig hard into understanding why the surplus in the summer of 2012 was what it was and what would be done with it. And that was the beginning of a good, sometimes contentious, but a good conversation that we had every year about the budgets. So let's keep digging on that, and I appreciate the manager's interest and Ms. Bottomless too, in making sure the public understands what we're talking about. And Ms. Connolly's clarification is very important. The City Hall and library projects are obviously on our side. On general government, kind of extraordinary events, and we do want to try to get them as right as we possibly can. To follow on what Mr. Litkenhouse said, whatever we decide the numbers are finally going to be, the chart that's drugstore reading glasses on, the chart that's on page 16, or the slide number 16, is the one that I would be interested in further discussions and understandings about where each of us sees us going as a city in terms of the percentage of funds that we allocate to general government and the school transfer. I'm pleased to see that at least for the last 5 years, I guess I can almost go back 7 years now, but general government has gone 4.7%, and school transfer has gone 6.4% in that 7-year period. At the time that the seat enrollment on the school side has gone almost 3%, and the city population's gone almost 2%. I know that school seats and population are not, the only drivers of cost. I understand that, but still they are drivers, and they're numbers that are easy to understand and numbers that we'll have in more specificity when we get the census in next spring. But to the point of some of the work that has not been done to the degree that maybe we might hope that it would be on the general government side, I'm just wondering what folks' views about sustainability of a difference in the allocation of, say, a number like 4.7, or let's just take the 5-year number, 2.4%, school transfer 4.7. Is that kind of difference sustainable, desirable, where we want to be as a community over the long term? Maybe it is. Maybe there's, a one-time or one budget year surge in allocation to the general government that would take care of City Hall and the library and perhaps some staffing needs that really have gone unmet on our side. That would help even those numbers up a little bit. Like I said, once we've decided what the numbers are, I would be curious to see. We're just assuming that there's a 50-50 split of whatever the surplus is finally decided to be, but I assume that would perpetuate the fairly significant difference between what the general government expenditure growth has been and what the school transfer has been. And I would just like us, if we're going to do that, to explain that to people and make sure that they're on board for it.
Ms. Messer, did you have something? I'm sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. As long as we're talking about this slide, I think there's a line on here that I would like to sort of highlight just to get information out to the community about that. And that's the seat enrollment versus the growth in school transfer. You can look at those numbers and draw the conclusion that they're not very well connected, and that would be incorrect. I think a more correct assessment is that the seat enrollment is only part of the story, and that school costs are driven by factors in ways that are not necessarily the same in other parts of our operations. If we have an increase in their class where we've got one extra we've got an extra class with 3, 4, 5 more kids than our planning factors allow. We need to bring in a new teacher, and that's a significant increase that wouldn't look like a significant increase in the seat enrollment. It's a cost driver. And sometimes it's not just a teacher, it's a teacher and a paraprofessional. Sometimes it's not just a kindergarten teacher and a kindergarten paraprofessional. It might be an English teacher or a math teacher at some other level that we also need because their enrollment has increased above a threshold that's in the planning factors. And so it's important to keep in mind that 1.8 or 1.8 or 3% your annualized things you're looking at, it's just only one part of the story, and it certainly isn't the full picture. So I think you need to be careful. We all sort of need to make sure we keep that being careful. And then there's also the fact that even if there weren't an increase in the enrollment, as with the general government side, there's just an organic growth in cost for keeping the people that are already on staff and keeping them well compensated and keeping them in a competitive arrangement with their neighboring jurisdictions. You have the same issue there. So it's just something to keep in mind. That seat enrollment line is potentially a little bit, it's easy to draw the line.
I think point well taken. I think the situation you're into when you do that, you have 3 or 4 more kindergarten kids than fits into your planning factors. I'm not trying to micromanage your business here. If you decide you need to hire that extra teacher, then what you end up with is kindergarten classes across the board, which are well below, or I guess better, you could say, than your planning factors. And, instead of a class of 23 kids, you end up with classes of 18 or 19 because you did hire that extra teacher. And that's, your business and fine to do as long as it fits within the bigger picture and as long as people understand that. That is a challenge. I'm not sure and I appreciate your second point about the importance of competitive pay, because I think one thing at least that I've learned in the process of the City Hall and library projects is, we're doing it the right way with the high school. We're, hiring the right people, a whole team of them. You can fill up the room with the people who are working on the high school project, and it's going to be well done. On the city side, I think, we've done the very best we can with, frankly, a thinner bench and existing staff doing things that are a little bit perhaps beyond their normal scope of work. And I'd like us not to do that, if I had my choice. But I understand that we're not going to spend the kind of effort that we're going to spend on the high school because it's such an important project on City Hall or library. The downside of that is we're also not going to get, necessarily the degree of we're going to get a good project, but it may not be as fabulous as the high school is going to be. Competitive salary is very important on the city side in the areas that Mr. Shields and Ross to some degree talked about. We need good engineers, good IT people. We need a surge on our side in competitiveness for pay for key positions as we, head into the next couple of years, I think. And that's just something that we're going to be looking at, I think, when we get to our part of the budget.
Mary Beth Tooth has asked that we continue on. We should probably get on at least with the school board's presentation. Why don't we take Mr. Snyder's last comment?
Just follow up on a comment that came up about the lockbox for the permit fees. My understanding is that was part of our action, that the permit fees were significantly increased. And I think the lockbox was part of that, a formal action, and was certainly part of the staff materials. So I think that ought to be circulated to people, that action, because I do recall specifically that we acted to put that lockbox on as partly for a justification for the significant increase in permit fees. So that'll be relevant. Secondly, with regard to the revenue sharing, I'd be interested in seeing the documents and the materials and the exchanges that led to that so that we're clear about the extent of that. I didn't recall formal action, but there may have been formal action and there may have been discussions, but I think we need to sort of make that clear to everyone. What is the basis for that understanding? Just as I think it's clear we need to put before the public the basis of the understanding that the permit fees would be lockboxed. Thank you.
Just one last little quick